Act 1. The desert remembers. There is a wall in the city of Persepolis. It has been standing for 2,500 years. The armies of Alexander the Great burned the palace around it. The Mongols swept through and left nothing but silence. The British carved up the land around it in boardrooms 8,000 miles away. The Americans backed a coup that rewrote the country's future. Revolution came, war came, sanctions came. The wall is still standing. This is not a metaphor. It is a fact, and it is perhaps the most important fact about the conflict the world is currently watching. A fact that no missile, no sanction, no diplomatic ultimatum has ever managed to dislodge. Iran has been here before. Not metaphorically, literally. Every superpower that has ever decided Iran was a problem to be solved has eventually discovered the same thing. Iran does not need to win. It does not need to dominate. It does not need to emerge triumphant from any particular confrontation. It just needs to still be there when the confrontation ends. And it always is.
Act 2. What winning looks like from the wrong angle. Most people watching the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran assume they are watching a war that one side will eventually win. That assumption is the first and most fundamental mistake. Because there are two entirely different games being played simultaneously, and only one side seems to understand this. The United States and Israel are playing chess. Objectives, pieces, endgames, defined moments of victory. You take the king, the game is over. The other side concedes. Iran is not playing chess. Iran is playing something closer to water, and you cannot checkmate water. To understand why, you have to understand what Iran actually wants. Not what Western analysts assume it wants, not what the rhetoric suggests, but what 45 years of observable behavior reveals. Iran does not want to conquer Israel. It does not want to occupy Saudi Arabia. It does not want a direct military confrontation with the United States that it knows, with perfect clarity, it would lose in the conventional sense within days. What Iran wants is permanence. It wants to still exist, still govern itself, still project influence across the region, still be the country that any future Middle Eastern settlement cannot be completed without. Not dominance, relevance. Not victory, survival with leverage. And here is the disturbing truth that the data keeps returning to. On those terms, Iran is winning.
Act 3. 1953 and why the past is not the past. In August of 1953, a man sat in his pajamas. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. He was the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, and he had made the mistake of nationalizing his country's oil industry, the one that British and American corporations had been extracting wealth from for decades. A CIA operation called Ajax, run in coordination with British intelligence, organized protests, bribed military officials, and orchestrated a coup that removed him from power in 72 hours. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest. He died there in 1967, having never left. The Shah was reinstalled. The oil flows resumed. The operation was, by the standards of Cold War geopolitics, a clean success. What the analysts did not model was the psychological residue. Because what happened in 1953 did not stay in 1953. It became the founding myth of every Iranian government that followed. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 was not primarily about religion. It was about the memory of a democratically elected leader removed by foreign hands. Every time an American president speaks about regime change in Iran, every time an Israeli official discusses military options, every single Iranian, regardless of their personal politics, regardless of whether they support the regime or despise it, hears 1953 in the subtext. The fear of foreign domination is not paranoia in Iran. It is lived history. And a country that is fighting to prevent something it has already experienced once is fighting with a ferocity that no military assessment can fully quantify.
Act 4. The Geography of Impossibility. Spend 30 seconds looking at a topographic map of Iran. Not a political map, a physical one. What you see is this: a country ringed almost entirely by mountains. The Zagros Range in the west, the Alborz in the north, the ranges of Khorasan in the east. In the center, one of the world's great deserts, vast, featureless, brutal. The country is 1.6 million square kilometers. It is 4 times the size of Iraq. The United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan, a country roughly half the size of Iran, with a fraction of the military capability, and did not win. The Soviets spent a decade there before that and did not win. The British tried in the 19th century and did not win. Every military strategist who has wargamed a land invasion of Iran arrives at the same conclusion through the same arithmetic. You can enter, you cannot hold. The mountains swallow armies. The desert exhausts them. The population? 89 million people with a deep, historically earned suspicion of foreign forces turns every occupied city into a permanent insurgency. This is not analysis. This is what the terrain does. The land itself is a weapon that Iran has never had to fire. And then there is the coastline. Iran controls the northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes every single day. The strait at its narrowest point is 33 kilometers wide. Iran has spent decades positioning anti-ship missiles, fast attack boats, mines, and drone capabilities specifically to threaten traffic through that channel. A military confrontation with Iran that escalates to the point of Iranian retaliation does not stay a confrontation with Iran. It becomes a confrontation with the global economy. The price of oil does not just rise, it becomes unstable in ways that cascade through every market on Earth. Recessions do not announce themselves. They arrive through exactly this kind of systemic shock. Iran knows this. The United States knows this. And Iran knows the United States knows this. The Strait of Hormuz is not a military asset. It is a hostage. Act 5. The Proxy Architecture. Here is a question that reveals everything about why this conflict cannot be resolved through force alone. Where is Iran? The answer, in 2024, is everywhere. Hezbollah in Lebanon maintains a missile arsenal estimated at over 100,000 rockets, more than most nation-states. It has governed southern Lebanon for decades, built schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and trained a fighting force that fought the Israeli military to a standstill in 2006. It is simultaneously a political party, a social welfare organization, a military force, and an Iranian instrument. The Houthis in Yemen have, since October 2023, launched hundreds of drones and missiles at commercial shipping in the Red Sea, disrupting one of the world's most critical trade routes from a country in the middle of a civil war, using weapons supplied through Iranian networks, forcing the United States Navy to conduct defensive operations at a cost of millions of dollars per day to stop projectiles that cost thousands of dollars each. The mathematics of that exchange alone should disturb anyone who thinks about it carefully. In Iraq, Iranian-aligned militias hold seats in parliament, run provincial governments, operate military units, and maintain influence over the country that American forces spent 9 years and nearly 5,000 lives attempting to reshape. In Syria, Iranian military advisors, Hezbollah fighters, and weapons flows were instrumental in keeping Bashar al-Assad in power through a civil war that killed 500,000 people. None of these are accidents. None of these are coincidences. This is a deliberate, decades-long strategic architecture designed around a single insight. If Iran can be threatened anywhere, Iran must be relevant everywhere. The proxies are not just military tools, they are negotiating positions. They are the reason that any diplomatic settlement of any Middle Eastern crisis eventually reaches a moment where someone says, quietly, in a back channel, "We need to talk to Tehran." You cannot bomb a network. You can destroy a node, the network reroutes. This is what Iran learned, and what its adversaries keep relearning. Act 6. The Nuclear Question.
and why it is the wrong question. Most people think the central question in the Iran conflict is whether Iran will build a nuclear weapon. That is not the question. The question, the one that determines everything, is whether Iran needs to actually build one. North Korea provides the most instructive case study in modern geopolitics. A country of 26 million people, with an economy smaller than the city of Birmingham, has rendered itself effectively immune to regime change by possessing nuclear weapons. No American president, regardless of rhetoric, has moved against Pyongyang in any meaningful military sense since North Korea crossed the nuclear threshold. The lesson was not lost on Tehran. But Iran's calculation is more sophisticated than North Korea's, and more dangerous precisely because of it. Iran does not need a weapon. It needs the world to believe the weapon is close enough that the cost of a military strike, the regional chaos, the proxy retaliation, the oil shock, the permanent radicalization of Iranian society, outweighs the benefit of setting the program back by a few years. This is called nuclear ambiguity.
And Iran has weaponized ambiguity itself. Every time negotiations collapse, Iran's enrichment levels rise. Every time military pressure increases, the program accelerates. The implicit message is never spoken aloud, but is understood perfectly by every intelligence service that monitors it. Push too hard, and the calculation changes. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the nuclear deal. Iran's uranium enrichment subsequently rose from the agreed 3.67% to levels exceeding 60%, one technical step below weapons grade. The deal was designed to keep enrichment below the threshold. Walking away from it did not stop the program. It accelerated it. The researchers who modeled this outcome were not surprised. The policymakers who ignored the models were not held accountable, and the enrichment continued.
Act 7. The October Threshold.
On the 1st of October, 2024, Iran launched approximately 200 ballistic missiles at Israel. This was not, as it appeared in the immediate hours, simply an escalation. It was a demonstration. The missiles were, in the assessment of most military analysts, deliberately calibrated. The targets were military installations. The warning time, through back channels that intelligence agencies confirmed, was sufficient for Israeli air defenses and American support to intercept the majority. The civilian casualty count was kept minimal.
Iran was not trying to destroy Israel on the 1st of October. Iran was showing Israel and the United States and the world what it could do when it tried to miss. 200 ballistic missiles launched from Iranian territory, traveling over 1,000 kilometers, penetrating, partially, one of the most sophisticated air defense architectures ever assembled. The message encoded in the trajectory of every one of those missiles was not military, it was philosophical. Imagine, the trajectory whispered, what we send when we are not calibrating. Israel's response was significant, precise. It demonstrated reach. It destroyed air defense radar systems. It made clear that Iranian territory was not sanctuary. And then both sides stepped back. Because both sides understand something that the outside world has struggled to articulate. This is not a war with a finish line. It is a permanent negotiation conducted through controlled violence. Each strike is a sentence in a conversation that has been ongoing since 1979. Neither side wants the conversation to end, because ending it, truly ending it through full-scale war, leads somewhere neither side can model with confidence. Deterrence is not peace, but it is not war either. It is the state both sides have chosen to live in.
Act 8. The question nobody in power is asking aloud. Here is what 50 years of pressure, sanctions, covert operations, proxy conflicts, and diplomatic isolation have produced. Iran's nuclear program is more advanced than it has ever been. Iran's regional influence is greater than it has ever been. Iran's government, for all its internal tensions and the genuine frustration of tens of millions of ordinary Iranians who want something different for their country, is still there. The policy has not failed occasionally. It has failed consistently.
across administrations of both parties, across Republican and Democratic presidents, across hawkish and diplomatic approaches for nearly half a century. And the question that almost nobody in a position of power asks aloud is this: what if the strategy itself is wrong? Not the execution, the strategy. What if a country that survived Cyrus and Darius and Alexander and the Mongols and the British and the Soviets and Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons and 45 years of maximum pressure cannot be coerced into submission? Not because the pressure is insufficient, but because the premise is incorrect. There is a concept in military theory called the culminating point, the moment at which an offensive force has expended enough resources that continued advance becomes counterproductive. Beyond the culminating point, pressing forward does not achieve more, it achieves less. It bleeds the attacker while the defender absorbs and adapts. The historians who study Iran's long relationship with foreign pressure use a different term. They call it civilizational patience. Act 9. What the ordinary people hold. This is the part of the story that the geopolitical analysis almost always leaves out. In Tehran, on an ordinary evening, a 23-year-old woman is deciding whether to wear her hijab on the street. She is calculating risk, not abstractly, but specifically, the way people calculate risk when the calculation has immediate physical consequences. She resents the government that imposes that calculation on her daily. She has protested. She has friends who were arrested. And she also remembers her grandfather talking about 1953. She has grown up in a country where the story of foreign interference is not history. It is the present tense, the frame through which every news event is interpreted.
This is the trap that no foreign policy has ever successfully navigated. The Iranian government's greatest asset is not its missiles or its proxies or its nuclear program. Its greatest asset is that every time external pressure escalates, it allows the government to point outward and say, "This is what we warned you about. This is why we need to be strong. This is why dissent is dangerous." The sanctions that were designed to turn the Iranian population against its government have, in significant measure, done the opposite. Not because Iranians support the regime's worst impulses, but because economic suffering imposed from outside tends to consolidate national identity rather than fracture it. The research on this is not ambiguous. Populations under external siege tend to rally. The policy designed to separate the Iranian people from their government has, for decades, handed that government its most useful narrative.
Epilogue. The wall at Persepolis. There is still that wall, 2,500 years of it, standing in the dust of Persepolis, in the province of Fars, in the country that called itself Persia long before anyone had conceived of the geopolitical entity called the Middle East. The armies came. They always come. Some burned more than others. Some stayed longer. Some rewrote the laws and the currency and the names of the streets. None of them rewrote the wall. What is happening right now? The missiles and the proxies and the enrichment and the sanctions and the back-channel negotiations and the carefully calibrated strikes is not new. It is the latest iteration of something that has been happening to this land and this people for longer than most modern nations have existed. And the question that the missiles and the sanctions and the intelligence assessments and the war game simulations have not answered, cannot answer, because it is not a military question, is this. What do you do with a civilization that has decided, at the deepest level of its collective identity, that survival is the victory? Not triumph, not expansion, not the imposition of its values on others, though it attempts that too. Just survival. Just the insistence on still being here. The United States has the most powerful military in human history. Israel has demonstrated a capacity for precision and strategic reach that military analysts study as a model. The combined economic pressure of decades of sanctions has inflicted genuine suffering on tens of millions of ordinary people who never chose this confrontation. And the wall at Persepolis is still standing. which raises a question that none of the briefing rooms and war cabinets and intelligence agencies have yet produced a satisfying answer to. If the goal is to change Iran, truly change it, not just punish it, and everything tried for 50 years has produced an Iran that is more nuclear, more influential, more entrenched, and more certain of its own indispensability than it was when the pressure began,
What exactly is the plan?